So, recycling of chemical elements. Biological, geochemical processes move nutrients between organic and inorganic parts of the ecosystem. So, the different biogeochemical cycles are the water, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycles. So in studying the cycling of these four elements, ecologists focus on four factors: the chemical's biological importance, forms in which each chemical is available and used by organisms, the major reservoirs for each chemical, and key processes driving movement of each chemical through its cycle. Let's go back and look at this. Evaporation of liquid water by solar energy, condensation of water vapor into clouds and precipitation, transpiration by terrestrial plants also moves significant amounts of water into the atmosphere. Surface and groundwater flow can return water to the oceans, completing the water cycle. The carbon cycle. The biological importance: carbon forms the framework of the organic molecules essential to all organisms. Forms available to life. Photosynthetic organisms utilize CO2 during photosynthesis and convert the carbon to organic forms that are used by consumers, including animals, fungi, heterotrophic protists, and prokaryotes. Reservoirs. The major reservoirs of carbon include fossil fuels, soils, the sediments of aquatic ecosystems, the ocean. There's dissolved carbon compounds in the oceans, plant and animal biomasses, and atmospheric carbon dioxide. The largest reservoir is sedimentary rocks such as limestone. However, this pool turns over very slowly. So I think that's very interesting. The largest reservoir is sedimentary rocks such as limestone. Key processes. Photosynthesis by plants and phytoplankton removes substantial amounts of atmospheric CO2 each year. This quantity is approximately equaled by CO2 added to the atmosphere through cellular respiration by producers and consumers. Over geological time, volcanoes are also a substantial source of CO2. The burning of fossil fuels, however, is adding significant amounts of additional CO2 to the atmosphere. The widths of the arrows reflect the relative contribution of each process. The nitrogen cycle. Biological importance: nitrogen is part of amino acids, proteins, and nucleic acids, and is often a limiting plant nutrient. And remember, limiting means the plant does not grow well or at all without it. Forms available to life. Plants can use two inorganic forms of nitrogen: ammonium and nitrate, and some organic forms such as amino acids. Various bacteria can use all of these forms as well as nitrite. Animals can use only organic forms of nitrogen. So ammonium, NH4, nitrate, NO3, nitrite, NO2. Reservoirs. The main reservoir of nitrogen is the atmosphere, which is 80% nitrogen gas, N2. The other reservoirs are soils and sediments of lakes, rivers, and oceans, which have bound nitrogen. Surface water and groundwater dissolve nitrogen, and the biomass of living organisms. The key processes. The major pathway for nitrogen to enter an ecosystem is via nitrogen fixation, which we have talked about. The conversion of into nitrogen by bacteria to forms that can be used to synthesize nitrogenous organic compounds. Some nitrogen is also fixed by lightning. Nitrogen, fertilizer, precipitation, and blowing dust can also provide substantial inputs of ammonium, NH4, and nitrate, NO3, to ecosystems. Ammonification decomposes organic nitrogen to ammonia. In nitrification, ammonia is converted to nitrate by nitrifying bacteria. Under anaerobic conditions, denitrifying bacteria use nitrate in their metabolism instead of oxygen, releasing nitrogen in a process known as denitrification. The width of the arrows reflect the relative contribution of each process. So this is much more complicated than the previous carbon and water cycles we've talked about. But you can see how bacteria are very important in this process. Nitrogen bacteria nodules, nitrogen-fixing soil bacteria, nitrifying bacteria, denitrifying bacteria, then decomposers, assimilation back into the soil, and here the animals feeding on this, and then nitrogen in the atmosphere. The phosphorus cycle. This is the last cycle we're going to be talking about. Biological importance: organisms require phosphorus as a major constituent of nucleic acids, phospholipids, and ATP and other energy-storing molecules, and as a mineral constituent of bones and teeth. Forms available to life. The most biologically important inorganic form of phosphorus is phosphate. Phosphate, which is right here, which plants absorb and use in the synthesis of organic compounds. Reservoirs. The largest accumulation of phosphorus are in sedimentary rocks of marine origin. There are also large quantities of phosphorus in soils, in the oceans in dissolved form, and in organisms. Because humus and soil particles bind phosphate, the recycling of phosphorus tends to be quite localized in ecosystems. Key processes. Weathering of rocks gradually adds phosphate to soil. Some leaches into groundwater and surface water and may eventually lead to the sea. Phosphate taken up by producers and incorporated into biological molecules may be eaten by consumers and distributed through the food web. Phosphate is returned to soil or water through either decomposition of biomass or excretion by consumers. Because there are no significant phosphorus-containing gases, only relatively small amounts of phosphorus move through the atmosphere, usually in the forms of dust and sea spray. Again, the widths of the arrows reflect the relative contribution of each process. So it's mainly on land: weathering, plants, consumption, decomposition, leaching into the water, and geological updrift. So the human population is disrupting chemical cycles through the biosphere. As the human population has grown, our activities have disrupted the trophic structure, energy flow, and chemical nutrients of many ecosystems. Effects can be local or regional, but the ecological can be global. So, in addition to transporting nutrients from one location to another, humans have also added some new materials to the ecosystems, some of them toxins. So, human activity often removes nutrients from one point of the biosphere and adds them to the other, such as nitrogen runoff from fertilizer of farms, which results in depletion on farms, with excess in streams and eutrophication. Agriculture removes nutrients from ecosystems that normally would be cycled back. So unless soybeans or a nitrogen-fixing crop is planted, nitrogen is depleted from the soil. Agriculture greatly impacts the nitrogen cycle. Removal of harvested plant biomass for market also removes mineral nutrients that would otherwise be cycled back to the soil when the plants die and become detritus. So industrially produced fertilizer is typically used to replace lost nitrogen, but the effects can be harmful because it's straight nitrogen. Critical load for nutrient is the amount that plants can absorb without damaging the ecosystem. So excess nutrients, when they are added, the critical load is exceeding, so the remaining nutrients can contaminate groundwater, freshwater, and marine ecosystems. Sewage runoff, which has a lot of nitrogen, can cause cultural eutrophication, resulting in excessive algal growth that greatly harm freshwater systems that choke out other life and cause death among fish species. Acid precipitation, the burning of wood and of coal and other fossil fuels releases oxides of sulfur and nitrogen that react with water in the atmosphere, forming sulfuric and nitric acid. North American and European ecosystems downwind from industrial regions have been damaged by rain and snow containing nitric and sulfuric acid. This is a map showing the pH, the acid precipitation distribution of distribution of acid precipitation in North America and Europe. And you can see very acidic in the mid-Atlantic here around New York, also mid-Europe here around Paris.